You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today are Hayley Andrews, developer, investor and mentor. Welcome to you, Hayley.
It's good to be back. How are you?
Good to see you. And John Howard, property developer, author and mentor. Hello, John.
You missed a few out, but that's absolutely fine,
Well,
Stephen. But that's fine.
I thought I'd cut it down.
You cut it down this week, I noticed. Yeah, thanks.
We don't want to spoil you.
No, thank you.
No. And how was the trip in from Ipswich?
Less than an hour on the train, and I'm still waiting to take you for lunch as we've arranged. It
Well,
still
I did
hasn't
set
happened.
out last week, but I got lost on the way. I
not
get
far.
a bit confused when I leave Canary Wharf. You see, that's
Understandable.
the danger. All right, well, lovely to see you both. So let's get on with the questioning.
Yeah.
And Hayley, we better let you go first. Looking across the internet, there are many tutorial programs and courses advising people to get into buy-to-let as a way of securing financial future. The government, however, seem to want to discourage the smaller investor. Do the panel think that the attraction of buy-to-let for the smaller investor is still there?
Yes, I think it will always be there. So I understand where the question is coming from, but property is a good solid asset class. You can get income from it. There's leverage, lending capability, etc. So I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, certainly not in our lifetime. So as I said, it is a good solid asset class. So while we can see that they are not necessarily discouraging, but encouraging, obviously limited company structure, people stopping people from investing in their own personal name. And we've got various opinions on why that's happening, tax, things like that. But I think what the government are doing is not discouraging the smaller landlord, just promoting a professional outlet.
Yeah.
Well, that can only be good, can't it?
Well, I think so. I don't think there's, I think that if we have, with what's happened with the buy-to-let industry over the last 10 years and everything that's been brought into place, it's just professionalising the industry. So that can only be good, surely.
Yeah, touching on a subject that we spoke about in an earlier programme, do you think there's any credibility to the argument that says we're moving more towards a European attitude? In other words, that the urge to buy is not quite as strong as it used to be with our younger people, and therefore, the rental market is actually just going to go from strength to strength.
I think people evaluate their situation differently now to what they did 10 years ago. So there's an argument for that. I do think that people, there's still people that are out there, that a very large amount of people that are out there that still want to be homeowners, and that's the aspiration of most people eventually. What I think has happened is most people are happy to rent. With their job, they're perhaps moving throughout different locations on a regular basis. And I think people stay put for shorter periods of time now. So buying is not necessarily on the top of their list, which, that's where the rental demand is coming in. But I do think eventually most people will look to buy their own home and own that home. I think the age of people doing that has just obviously increased.
What do you think, John?
Well, I think the government are hell-bent on trying to help as many people as possible to buy their own home, and home ownership in the UK is 63% or something like that, the highest in Europe. It's tax-free. Very, very few. In fact, it's a good question for you, actually, turning it back on you for a change. How many countries in the world have a tax-free regime for owning their own home and selling it? Not that many. Most people make you pay tax.
Well, I do wonder.
And under Labour, they will try and do that, I'm sure. But God forbid that ever happens.
Yeah, well, I think it'll cause fighting in the streets, won't it?
Yeah.
If that.
But I mean, it's pretty unique in this country.
It is unique. It is unique. I just wonder, with young people today, I think I think you used the right expression. I wonder how far up the priority list it is now.
I think
Whether
it's
they've had
still a
it beaten out of them
priority.
in a way.
I think it's a priority for them. They're just doing it at a later date, whereas, people, I mean, if you look at statistics, most people are still living at home between the ages of 25 and 33.
What are they doing, Hayley, living at home at that age? How mad's that?
I mean, I bought my first home when I was 18.
So did I.
19,
Yeah, 90. But, we might be considered aspirational, but there are a lot of other aspirational people out there who can't do that. And I understand that. But certainly by the age of 25, unless you're saving up for a deposit, should you be living at home?
Well, it comes
really?
down to affordable housing as well, doesn't it?
Yes, it depends where you are in the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very much so.
So I think renting gives the younger generation the flexibility of choice. It allows them to move where the jobs are and get better income, etc. So there's an argument to and against, I suppose, but.
And I think also they're more choosy these days.
Yeah.
I honestly think they're more choosy. You can go and buy a flat for £50,000 and get a mortgage on it if you want. Most people in this country say they don't want to live there. Well, you may not want to live there, but if you want to get on the housing ladder, you can.
It's a choice, isn't it? It's a lifestyle choice, and people have to say, well, would I rather have, a property that's maintained, that is nice to live in? I don't have to do any work to it, and the landlord is responsible for that.
I do think there's another factor to this, and it's the employment factor. I mean, years ago, when I was first starting work, my father, I think he worked for British Telecom, or
Wasn't called that in those days, was it?
No,
Stephen?
GPO or whatever it was called then, and he couldn't understand I ever wanted to change jobs. He worked for that
All his life.
organisation,
Yeah,
all his life.
That's changed.
That doesn't apply
No,
anymore.
it's
No,
changed.
most
It's
people
gone.
are in a job 1 to 2 years now before they move on to something new.
So that will lean towards the rental market, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of
Is
us
it?
can't get jobs.
You're
Unemployable.
unemployable. So am I. That's why we're property developers.
Unemployable.
That's why we're all in here.
Yes.
That's what we're doing today. Yeah, trying to earn a living. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we'll have to try and assess whether we're doing very well or not. won't we?
Yeah.
Well, the ratings tell us that. The show's still on the air, so it must be doing something right.
Yeah, we're still just about here.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. Hayley, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, John, another politically motivated question.
What's the surprise?
The current government have stated on numerous occasions that a rethink and implementation of new planning regulations will ease the shortage of housing stock across the country. Have the experts on the panel with development experience enjoyed any positive results yet from the government's actions? The government stated in April that a budget of 5 billion, for instance, would be allocated to unsafe cladding change. This is a figure announced in the budget again. Are all these figures just repetitive figures that have all been announced before? In other words, the number of houses to be built, the cladding. Are they just regurgitations of previous notices?
A lot of the announcements in the budget had already been announced prior to the budget in terms of funding and so on. You've covered it. We could speak all day from what you've said just now. Whoever wrote that in, emailed that in. I mean, basically, the cladding situation. Is it the government's job to fund all the cladding? I'm not sure it is. Wasn't there. They didn't buy the flat. They didn't have the situation. The developer at the time probably did it right as well. The standards have gone higher. Building regulation approval was I'm sure met and dealt with correctly at the time. It was built, but things have moved on, and we now know that they need fire breaks at every level. There's two types of cladding problem. There's the overall cladding problem, which is combustible, which is very, very serious, and then there's the fire breaks, which are something which we didn't used to put in years ago, but now we do need to put in. And I think it's very difficult for the government. I mean, is it the government's fault? Is it the government's fault? Half the country's overweight. People are saying, "Oh, it's the government's fault." At the end of the day, people need to take responsibility for their own properties. Surely, really.
Well, I think the other consideration here is, of course, that it's not the government that's paying for it; it's you and I as taxpayers.
Well, ultimately, of course, and that's what the government's there to do, to collect taxes and spread them out around the place and all the rest of it. But I just think that, I'm not saying, I think it's tremendous the government are willing to help, that's the first thing. But of course, the government are blamed for everything, and that's just crazy. What was the second question? part of the question?
Well, it's just whether it's all a regurgitation of previous
well,
announcements.
to a
really.
point. To a point, it is. It is. Yeah, to a point. I'm sure that's right. And you know, they want to get as much good news out as they can all the time. And at the moment, goodness me, they need it, don't they, Hayley?
Yeah.
They've had a bad few weeks.
You don't like talking about politics, do you?
Never talk about politics,
I always,
especially on air.
I always
I let
do.
John do the politics.
I put my head above the parapet, as you know.
Yeah.
Yep. Say it how it is.
All right, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me are John Howard and Hayley Andrews. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Hayley, your second question is, now that we've had yet another change of minister responsible for housing, what would be the top 3 things you would have the minister introduce to solve our housing stock shortages and ease purchase difficulties for, in particular, first-time buyers?
The first thing I'd have them do is stay in the job longer than 12 months, or perhaps not get fired.
Be a good start.
That would be a very good start.
John, how many have we had? 12 in 10 years?
13, isn't it?
13 now,
13.
yeah.
Of course, there's a difference between housing minister and housing secretary. So housing secretary is Michael Gove, and the last one was in the job a few years, as you know. This one, hopefully, Michael Gove will hopefully do the same. But the housing minister is different to that, yeah.
Okay. Carry on, Hayley.
See, this is why I never talk politics. John does the politics.
Okay.
I listen.
Well, I do London. He does politics, and you do.
We haven't established that yet. We're a mystery.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a difficult task, isn't it? And so I can only obviously give an opinion, or my opinion. I don't think there's any silver bullet here. I don't think that there's kind of a quick fix. I think whoever takes on, who have we got? Housing Secretary, we've got Michael
Gove.
Grove. Who's the Housing Minister currently?
Simon.
That's
Tamworth.
it. So from my
Your
neck
area.
of the woods, so I should know here. I don't. So they've got a huge task. I mean, of course, we talked earlier about the target of 300 houses per year isn't happening. The gap is just widening. So if I had to say what I thought could happen to help the housing crisis, it would be we need to build more affordable housing, which I think they're addressing.
They are addressing 180,000 they're meant to be doing in the next 5 years, yeah?
Yeah, so that's the first thing. In the right places, I would say, because it's about the right type of housing and the right location.
Well, they're going to build them on brownfield sites, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's the idea. So they're likely to be, close to local amenities and so on.
Yeah.
In that respect.
Yeah. We need to obviously build quicker, faster.
That's a bit harder.
More.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hayley, just let me interrupt for a second. When the governments say we're going to build all these houses, 300,000 is the target.
It needs to be 500, by the way.
Who's we?
Well,
Everyone.
it needs to be, it needs to be private sector and social, doesn't it? So it's us, it's the large
But you see,
developers.
I just come to the conclusion
The government.
The whole argument is disingenuous because, they say, well, we need 300,000. Do they mean 300,000 social homes?
No,
Do
they mean-
they mean
no,
overall.
Overall.
No, but 300,000 isn't the right figure.
Well,
But that's what they're aiming at. They
Yeah.
need 500,000
Well,
a year,
I'm
not
sure-
300,000.
I'm sure they do, but John, if you let me make the point.
Yeah, go on.
If you take the comparison between Labour manifesto and the amount of money they were committing to building these houses,
Yeah.
they both came up with the same sort of figure,
Yeah.
right? Except on the finances. And if you actually divide it up, Labour were costing out the cost of all these houses at 100,000 per unit.
No.
Yes,
no,
they were.
No, that's wrong. Well, with all due respect, you're wrong. And the reason you're wrong is because the government is a subsidy It's not. They're not building them all. The government aren't spending all their money building the houses. They're spreading the money around.
All right.
So they might be funding 40% of the cost, and the housing association doing the rest. That's why.
If you're saying they're two totally different targets and two totally different figures, that's another argument.
Well, they are. Labour don't know what they're talking about either.
On the same figures, Labour were costing either their subsidy or their cost out at 100,000.
Well, they would do.
And the Conservatives were costing it out at 60,000. Yeah. And I just wonder what you can build for 60,000.
Well, the whole point.
Not much.
The point is, Hayley.
Well, that's another thing, though. We need to look at,
I think we need a housing
a
minister
wider
that
range
can add up,
of builders and different construction types.
Modular.
Yeah.
But you're not being fair. You're really not being fair, Stephen, because that 60,000 is a percentage of what a house would cost to build. They're giving grants and they're giving funding. They're not saying they're building every house is going to cost 60,000. It might be a proportion of what the house is going to be cost to build. So I don't think you're being very fair. And I know you've got a downer on this government, but I don't think you're being fair.
I think they're doing what they are doing as much as they possibly can. I mean, looking at the plans that they have in place, the funds that will be available, the grants, etc. There's a lot more than most people anticipated, and actually there is a lot out there at this moment in time, especially given the question being first-time buyers. As we've said many times before, there's more more help than there ever has been.
I do just come back to this business of saying, well, I just wonder where the money goes and who it is that is we that are contributing to this big total.
Well, I think it's the local level that really waste money, in my opinion. I think on a national level the message is right, but I don't think that message filters down to a local level, which is why one of the other reasons, or one of the other things I think could happen, would be a reform of the planning system.
I mean,
because that is
absolutely right.
Totally. I even agree with Stephen on that.
We're in a very technical age.
It's archaic.
We have green things to consider.
Yeah.
We have to be eco-friendly in everything that we do, and I do just wonder, with greatest respect, and whether a panel of 10 or 12 lay councillors
don't know what they're talking about. Haven't got any experience.
I think it's unfair to say that. I mean, some of them know what they're talking about, but I don't think the message on a national level is really filtered down to a local level. Even the simplest of planning for developers these days takes far too long.
Yeah. We've got that in with permitted developments, haven't we? With permitted developments, some councils are just saying no thanks.
Well, it's just not a waste of space, but or not a waste of time, but not as easy as it's kind of headlined. There is a lot of issues with the planning.
But they've made a pretty good job of it. And if you go to Wales, and I'm doing a joint venture in Wales with someone at the moment, and in Wales there's no PD. Yeah. Why is that? Because it's a Labour government and they don't like private housing. That's the truth.
I think the overall message is there. I think that the plans in place are fantastic on a national level. It really needs to filter down to a local level.
To answer the question then.
3 things.
Hayley's answered it.
Yeah. Reform of the planning.
Right. Number 1.
Yeah, reform of planning, absolute necessary. The building faster, wider range of builders and construction types.
Better use of technologies across the board.
Absolutely. And building affordable housing, both private and social, in the right areas, right type of houses in the right areas.
Especially, I would say, brownfield sites. There's thousands and thousands of them across the UK. We're not utilising those properly.
Okay. All right, John, your final question, again, is a little political and a little general. In essence, do you think the government are the right body to be interjecting into the housing market in the ways that they're having to at the moment? And again, I go back to cladding, to safety regulations, to help to buy schemes, to stamp duty holidays. Is this the government's job, or do you think that the whole industry should be governed by market forces?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the government do have to step in when there's a crisis, and we've just had, COVID, and it could well have been a lot worse than it was in terms of economically. I mean, the government have done a brilliant job economically. Whatever anyone says about anything else about this government, they've supported everybody as best they could. Probably, in my view, too much. I think the furlough could have finished sooner, and I'm not sure we needed to support the stamp duty like they did, because actually, the problem with the government is they're always 3 months behind, because when they hear about things, it's already happened. Happened, and actually, the property market, Hayley, was coming back, wasn't it, quite well before stamp duty, and actually all that really happened. I don't think the stamp
duty holiday.
I don't think it was necessary. And I understand what they're saying, because on average, 5% of the value of every home in the UK, whoever buys that home, on average spends 5% of that value improving it. And of course, that makes a huge difference. Carpets, curtains, paint, and so on. That's what it was about, as much as it was about getting people to purchase. This government, and every Tory government, is hell-bent on home ownership, because they know that way they'll likely to vote Tory rather than Labour, and that's just a fact. What they're trying to do is take the control away from the top 10 house builders in the UK that control 65% of the market. That's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to give small developers, and we'll consider small under 500 units a year, like Hayley and myself and others, more support and more control, and by speeding up, hopefully, the planning process, which is a dog's dinner, but PD has helped out a little bit in certain cases. Certainly helped us. More difficult now because everyone's on the bandwagon. So I think it is right for the government to step in where necessary. Now, very interestingly, the Help to Buy scheme finishes in April 2023, and it's already starting to tail off further down. So whether they will replace that, and I've asked 1 or 2 people in the right place. In fact, I've got dinner with Kwasi. That's what I always forget his surname. I need to remember it for next Thursday, by the way.
You do.
Next Friday, I should say.
Unless you take me along.
Unless take you along as well, because because that's one question. He needs to be asked. What's going to happen to Help to Buy? They're saying it's too early to say at the moment, but hey, we just have to see.
Okay, all right. Well, that's all we've got time for. So, big thank you to Hayley Andrews. Thank you for coming in, Hayley. John Howard. As ever, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Even if we did cut your titles short a little.
Well, we won't worry about that.
There we are. I'm Stephen Galpin. Don't forget, if you do have a question for our panel, do get in touch with us. Best way through the website, propertytv.uk. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.